And the whole idea is that I feel as though in order to be able to do business in Africa, you have to understand the people of Africa. That's my thing. And to understand the people of Africa means that you in effect have like a way of understanding the language, because I believe it's Nelson Mandela who says like you know, once you know somebody's language you can understand them a lot better. I believe there's a Mandela quote like that. So yeah, so the whole idea around She Speaks Africa, it's a combination of work that I've done. I do a lot of strategy work, digital campaigns, and then also creating different ideas and original productions that fall under She Speaks Africa.
Hello everybody, you're welcome to Just for Women Africa. My name is Olalekan Amusa, the founder of Just for Women Africa. And today, before we start the show, we'd like to give thanks to our host, Tia Coffee House. They're located off the Partition Number Road here in Accra. Great, nice, serene environment. You can come over for breakfast, lunch, dinner. Tia Coffee House is the place to be. And today on the show, she was the head of Channel O in South Africa. She's worked with the BBC. She's worked with who again?
Oh wow, yeah, I've had quite an interesting, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I've worked with, well, I started out with YFM in South Africa, and then Channel O is the head of Channel O Africa, so looking after East, West and Central Africa. And while I was there, I then got moved into like executive position, so I was one of the exec producers for Big Brother Africa. I was working with Africa Magic Viewers Choice Awards. I was one of the original producers. I did some, let me say, freelance work with BBC, just a whole lot of people, Red Bull, Standard Bank. I did work with them, just traveling and telling African stories. So yeah. And 702, sorry, in South Africa, of course, 702.
Yeah, of course. And she's known as Leslie Kasumba.
Yes. Yes.
You're welcome to the show again.
Thank you so much.
All right, okay, so let's start off. What was it like actually running Channel O in South Africa?
So Channel O was quite interesting. When I initially with Channel O, working with Channel O was quite a privilege. Growing up, I used to watch Channel O, and it was like kind of obviously the first Pan-African channel, and you were seeing music from everywhere, so which was really great. And then because I had a background in hip hop, I started. I was hosting a show on Channel O called MC Africa, where I traveled to different African countries, hang out with rappers.
Okay. My
poor dad, as a Ugandan person, I still love you. So hang out with rappers in different countries, literally in the middle of battles and ciphers, because that was who I was. And so I worked on that. And then after I'd and at the same time I was working at YFM, which is a big youth radio station in South Africa, and so at YFM a lot of the big names in South Africa come from there. So Black Coffee was part of YFM, Trevor Noah, everybody was literally like the hub of where entertainment blew up in South Africa.
Yeah.
And then there was like a bit of a period in my life where there was a break, and while I was doing a bit of work, so when I was doing a little bit of like work here, so emceeing events here and all of that, and then one day I got a call from a Ugandan in South Africa called Joby, and he said to me, oh, the Mnet executives are talking about you, and I'm like, oh, Joby, that's cool, thanks, bye. That was the conversation. And then they asked me to join. Basically, I went for interviews, and they asked me to join in as head of Channel O Africa. And what it was that I had to look after East, West, and Central Africa, and then the other head of Channel O, should I say, took care of Channel O in SADC, in Southern Africa, basically. For me, it was really awesome being able to be at Channel O at that time. That was in 2011. It was also the first year that I was one of the exec producers and the final select committee for Big Brother Africa. The job was really dynamic. Yeah. I got to, first of all, learn a lot about the continent even more. Secondly, I felt as though I had a huge responsibility, because growing up, I've always felt that music has the power to unite people. And at that time, what was happening with African music was not the same as what it is now. Everybody was kind of sitting in their corners. So my job was that how am I going to make Channel O Africa reflective for people across the continent, you know, so that people don't feel like, oh, you're playing too much Kenyan music or too much Ugandan music, or it was about finding the balance. So I really it was a huge responsibility, but it was awesome because I got to be part of what was going on as African music was really starting to bubble into what we're seeing now. And also while I was at Channel O, my boss then, the MD of Mnet Africa, was Biola Labi, and she threw me into the deep end quite often. So then that's how I got involved with Big Brother Africa, and I became responsible for the Sunday night shows.
Okay.
So it was up to me to decide who was performing each Sunday night.
Wow.
And make sure that the person was big enough in their country but could also be able to communicate, to be able, people from around the continent would be able to respond to them. So it was just a dynamic position all the time, learning all the time, and really just being able to put my love for music and Africa together in one place and play a strategic role in ensuring that African music was able to grow to the level that it has.
Okay, all right. So what's your opinion about the music industry in Africa? I mean, you joined Channel O in 2011
Yes.
to 2014, also 15?
2015,
Yes,
beginning of 2015.
yeah. What's your impression about the African music so far? I mean, from 2011 to now, that's been a long time. What has it grown? I mean, there's a lot of focus on the Nigerian music, but what about the rest of Africa? What's your opinion about the music?
I think that African music has grown in leaps and bounds. I think that number one, in 2011, when you look at the period from 2011 to 2015, the restriction was just the fact that it was a DSTV. You see what I mean? That was the restriction. But now the gates are wide open because of social media, digital media being what it does, what it is. And so I think that it's really grown. First of all, like a few of the artists that we had initially worked with, from Burna Boy to Wiz and all of that, they were all part of that initial stage. And then of course P Square was there, that doing really well at that time as well. And David O and everybody. But the thing is, like, at that particular time, I feel that everybody was like really excited. So there was like this buzz that was going on. Like people knew that there was something, something was possible.
Yeah.
And now they've been able to fulfill their possibilities. So I feel as though African music has proven that the African dream is possible, because a lot of these African artists have, they've become like global ambassadors, and they've reshaped the idea of what people think it means to be African. They've reshaped the idea of what people think about the continent. Growing up, I know, for example, a lot of the slang or the words that I would use would be based off the music that I listen to. And now to hear people in other countries using like slang from songs that they've heard, African songs, it just shows you the power that African music has. And so it's become almost like a soft power that has done what, not just music, but I think the creative space as a whole, that has done what leaders in Africa have not been able to do. When it comes to Nigerian music compared to, say, to other regions, I think, for example, in South Africa has always had a very dynamic music scene. If you're in South Africa, you'll find some of the best jazz artists, some of the best hip hop artists, the best kwaito, the best, all of that stuff. So I'm not even surprised to see Amapiano doing as well as what it does. Yeah. And in South Africa, people really just love going to shows, and so there's that. I think that when I look at different territories, also being Ugandan, of course, and East Africa, Ugandans are very much, they really enjoy people coming we enjoy people coming to our country. So just now, Tiwa Savage has just performed. Ugandans stood out in the rain. They stood out in the rain.
That's amazing.
They really enjoyed. And in Tanzania also, you can have a concert where there's 70,000 people, and they will love your music regardless of where you are and what part of the continent that you're from. They're just like, if the music is good, they're going to be supporting you. I do think that, yes, Nigeria obviously and South Africa actually are really leading the race, but we also shouldn't forget about the francophone markets, where you have artists like Aya, you have people like Fally Ipupa before and everything, who really are dominating like globally, but in that particular region. I think that African music is in a place now where it's the global center of culture. And I think that we're going to get into the next stage where it kind of settles in, and then all of the other countries and genres will also be able to come in. So now we're in a place where it's the global center and it's popular, and it's going to be opening the doors more for the other territories and regions. When I interviewed the Spotify managing director, and she actually said to me that, for example, when they were in when they had a documentary, they were looking at people in Japan, and they were listening to Amapiano from South Africa, for example. She also said about how Genge music from Kenya is actually a lot more popular than what people think. But music by nature, it's always been about hunting for what it is that you want.
Okay, that's it. So what do you think about the African music in the next 10 to 20 years?
10 to 20 years, wow. That's a really, this is a very hard question. I feel that African music in the next 10 to 20 years, obviously it's going to evolve and change a bit in terms of the sound, or, it's not always going to be exactly the same. It will evolve, but music has a way of doing that. I think what needs to happen is that we need to have more structures in place in Africa for musicians to be able to survive in Africa. I think that policies need to be put in place. Things need to be more structured, because then artists, not just the big artists, but the artists, the small artists who are in their countries, can also know that they'll be able to make money, that they work within a system. It just needs to be, I feel as though the big, like the leaders, the private sector need to look at the music industry as a sector. And I think that what needs to happen now is that the foundation, in terms of like the nuts and bolts and all of that, needs to be put in place, so that it's not just the whole show of it, but it's like the foundation, it's like the whole foundation, so that it stays strong regardless of what's happening.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's shift away from your days in Channel O to current. You're now an entrepreneur. You run a program.
That is so scary. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm like, because you know why? Because my whole life I was just like, I will never be an entrepreneur. I would never be an entrepreneur. And then I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So what has the switch been like? I mean, being from a head of a well-known organization to now being an entrepreneur, running your own show. She Speaks Africa. What has it been like?
Well, first of all, I do miss business class flights being on somebody else. I'm just keeping it real. There were privileges, obviously it's very different when you work for for the biggest Pan-African broadcaster, and you're able to travel and you arrive places and everybody's expecting you, and you get there's protocol, it's fantastic, you're living your best life, you're coming back, you're like a star, because that was my job. I had the best of that world. Being an entrepreneur, you're counting your money a lot more because and you have to you kind of like, I think the biggest difference obviously is the financial. That is the biggest difference, because when you work for a big organization, it's your paycheck is coming in regardless.
Definitely.
When you're an entrepreneur, you literally don't even get sick days. My team will tell you, like, even when they're like, oh my gosh, Lee, you just need to rest, I literally go off on them. I'm like, if I rest, what's going to happen? And then where's the money going to come from, So I'm calm now, but in general, I can be quite hectic. But it literally is, it's the financial. I think that's the biggest thing, the financial, because you literally have to keep working and being able to budget your money a lot more. You have to have the balance between yourself and your team, and making sure that you get the right team. When you work at a big organization, getting a team, it's like your team is pretty much set up. Even if you bring people in, you've got HR, you've got all of these things.
Yeah,
when you're an entrepreneur, there's no HR. You're basically HR, you're the accountant, all of these things. And I'm like, why is this my life? Because my sisters will laugh, especially my one sister. She says that Leslie, you're a lady of leisure, literally. So there's no leisure now. Now I'm like taking everything seriously, So you become the entire organization as a whole. And also the access that you had, even though you had great relationships with people, the access that you have is not the same. You have to find a way of rebuilding and getting the doors reopened again, because you shouldn't rely on the fact like, I was there when this person did that. And I also, just as a personal policy, it's something I don't do. You need to be able to rebuild bridges and rebuild relationships of your own. And that's also the challenges. So I would say it's the finance, it's the fact that you become the entire organization, and it's the fact that you have to rebuild your own networks.
Okay, that's been nice. All right, so can you tell us about She Speaks Africa?
Yeah.
How long are you running it for, and what is it about?
So how long have I been really running it for, or how long has it been around for? Teasing. Okay.
How long has it been around for?
It was registered officially in 2016.
Okay.
Because I'm Ugandan, and my family had obviously traveled a bit, and I spent a bulk of my life in South Africa. But even with that, we were always traveling around, had friends from around the continent. My sister went to school in Zimbabwe, just so many things. My parents were in Kenya. There were a lot of things happening. And what happened is that I basically was able to form friendships with people and to understand the continent, number one, based on my parents, because especially my dad, he's like the great Pan-African, and also my mom, and they would just like learn languages quickly. Like my dad could speak Lingala, he'd be able to greet. I'm like, what? Why do you know Lingala? Like that kind of thing. And so what happened is that when I was in South Africa, music was the way, well, hip hop specifically, how I was able to make friends and find my place.
Okay.
So when all of this changed, when I then from that, at that particular time, there wasn't really like a overall African movement going on. You know, everybody was kind of in their own corners, except if you were in particular regions. So East Africa always kind of, you know, moved together. And so my personal interest and my work and all of that in music and culture was what led me to start to understand the continent a lot more. So then what happened is, when I was in South Africa, when it came to people asking me, when I was working with 702, people would be like, oh, can you find out about this? Can you find out about that? And I realized, because I'm actually a history nerd, that's my thing. I realized that, I was able to give like an analysis of what was going on in this country from understanding the people or being able to read up a bit about the history. But the culture and the music was my entry point in.
Okay.
And then people would start asking me. Then I started doing work, like traveling around, doing shows on tech, which was tech and innovation. That was with Standard Bank and business in Africa and so forth. And then somebody said to me, wow, Leslie, if Africa was a language, you would speak it. And I'm just like, oh, that's quite, and it kind of stuck in my mind. And then the thing that came to my mind, like what dropped in my spirit, was She Speaks Africa. And because people would then even ask me stuff like, oh, do you know a rapper in Egypt? Like I said, yeah, I can find your rap in Egypt. And literally from my networks, I was able to do it, because music and hip hop and just in general, like culture opens doors for you that politics might not. So from that perspective, then the name She Speaks Africa dropped in my spirit, and I kind of locked it in there. In 2016, I registered the company name, and it was just kind of dormant. And then when I came to, I was doing work, but I wasn't branding it. I didn't have a logo, none of that. And then when I came to Ghana in March 2020, I was here for a bit, and then I didn't leave. And then one of my now clients, Canal Plus, asked to do work with me, and then they wanted to do it as a business to business. I said, okay, I'll just do it as She Speaks Africa.
Okay.
Ghana. So basically, then that's how the business took off. So now I have clients like Platoon and E-Entertainment, like a host of different people that are my clients. And the whole idea is that I feel as though in order to be able to do business in Africa, you have to understand the people of Africa. That's my thing. And to understand the people of Africa means that you in effect have like a way of understanding the language, because I believe it's Nelson Mandela who says, like, once you know somebody's language, you can understand them a lot better. I believe there's a Mandela quote like that. So the whole idea around She Speaks Africa, it's a combination of work that I've done. I do a lot of strategy work, digital campaigns, and then also creating different ideas and original productions that fall under She Speaks Africa, just to tell multiple layered stories about Africa.
Okay, that's nice to know. So, since you started being an entrepreneur, what are some of the lessons you learned? Is it different from it being a man being in business? A woman, do they treat you differently? Okay, let me rephrase the question. Doing business as an entrepreneur, what's the environment like for a woman? Do you feel men get more advantage as women compared to women?
I think that definitely there can be something that's said about men getting more of an advantage, perhaps because men are better to a degree with networking. But I think that perhaps in the creative and the storytelling space that I am in, and because I kind of came in with a weight and a background in the industry, I wouldn't say that as a woman it's been challenging, because maybe I have like a bit of a privilege and an advantage because I had a body of work going in already. So I basically frontline the business, so people trust me and therefore they trust the business, because I have I kind of have built that trust within the industry for the work that I've done all these years. But I think that definitely definitely women have a tougher time in the business space. But I do feel that specifically when you're in countries like Ghana, you see a lot of women who are in the front line of entrepreneurship and business as a whole. I always use this example. I feel as though if the markets were to shut down, like whole economies in Ghana, in Uganda, everything would shut down if none of the women went to the markets. If the market women were not there, we would have no running African economies. And most African economies are more informal. We have a large sector of informal economies versus the formalized economies. So I don't know. I believe that African women are powerful. I think that African women have always been at the front line of running their homes. They've always been a part of that. There's always been this delicate balance. They've always been hardworking. So for me, I don't know, maybe I'm a bit idealistic, but I believe that in terms of African women, like we just know how to, and I'm also blessed to really have a lot of powerful African women that I know of who are doing awesome things that I'm just sitting there like, wow, you guys are incredible. So I think that Africa is a little bit different to the rest of the world from that perspective, because African women are just like leading. I mean, when you look at with the Ashanti people, like I heard about how obviously with the Ashanti people, the women are the ones who decide what the bloodline is, right?
Yeah.
When you look at places like in South Africa with the Zulu people, like it was well known that Shaka Zulu never did anything unless if his mom, Queen Nandi, said something. So it was the women that were always the whisperers, the women that were always leading. Okay. So I think that maybe the unbalance came with westernization, but that's just the very long version of what I believe.
Okay. All right, let me just ask this question real quick before we round up the interview. You've been head of a major organization in Africa, Channel O. What can organizations around Africa and the world do to make sure that when women are harassed, they actually come out to talk about it? Because women are harassed in organizations around the world, but we don't hear the stories, just a few drops once in a while. What can organizations actually do to ensure that women are not harassed, and if they're harassed, they come out to talk about it?
I think firstly it's about creating a safe environment so that women feel comfortable enough to talk about what's happening. So for example, in just very plain and simple, like when you're in an HR environment, if you've been harassed, and this is the same in the policing system, if a woman has unfortunately been a victim of rape or sexual, whatever the case may be, or domestic violence, she should not be going to report it to policemen. A woman should not be going and reporting the sexual harassment to men. Do you see what I mean? Within the building. So I think it's about, that is very obvious, that you need to have women obviously who are trained, who can who know how to communicate with them, because it's not just about being a policewoman or being an HR person, but having a place where you can talk to somebody who's trained, that can talk you through it, that you feel comfortable, so that you're able to talk. So I think it's about creating that environment of safety, of being able to talk about what's going on. But before even that, in general, like organizations need to create an environment so that women do not become victims of that.
Okay.
Women, they need to create the environment so that we don't have to think about what happens when you're inevitably sexually go through sexual abuse and all of that. We should get to a place now, it's 2022, where this should not even be a thing anymore. They need to create an environment where you don't have like a boys only club, you don't have that kind of thing, you don't have, because people always know. Nobody's ever surprised. Like if you go to an organization and somebody says XY did this, there's at least 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 people in the organization that know, oh, you know what, Kunle, we knew. What do you mean? Or we knew Donald was always like that. There's always those people who know. But if you knew the whole time, why were you cultivating that bad environment? So before we even get to the point of women being sexually harassed, people always know. So the organization needs to relook and to rethink, and not just keep people in based on how good they are, but I feel that you also need to have people who are working in strategic positions that have good integrity, that have integrity, so that people are not in a position where they are sexually harassed and so forth. Because people always know. That's the one thing. It's never a surprise.
Okay, that's good. All right. Okay, so we're about to round up the interview. What's your advice to women out there in Ghana, Uganda, South Africa, who feel that it's a man's world, women get harassed sexually and stuff like that? What's your advice to them?
Well, firstly, to any women that have been the victims of sexual harassment or any of that kind of thing, my heart goes out to them. I cannot even imagine if that was something that I had to experience. And I think that when you look at the stats, I'm part of the privilege that has not had to experience that. So even in the workplace. So from that perspective, I think, my heart really goes out to women from that perspective. Secondly, I feel as though one thing is that, my sisters and I were raised by my dad. So my mom passed away when we were pretty young. So we were raised by a man. And we were always taught about just valuing ourselves and not allowing what the outside thought about us to determine who we were from the inside. And that's something that I take in terms of my work, and that's the advice that I give. You've got to find your value in yourself. You shouldn't wait for everybody to kind of like to agree with your vision, or you shouldn't you shouldn't want everybody to approve you, because that's the one thing. Women always want approval. Men don't care if you like them, if you don't like them. They'll be like, they'll be like, if you like me, if you don't, again, it's okay. Like, they don't care. But women, we generally are like, do they like me? If I say it in this way, are they going to understand? Do they misunderstand me? A man doesn't care. A man cannot know anything, and he will pretend like he knows everything. Like, he'll make up a story and pretend like he knows everything. A woman is always like in her mind fact-checking, thinking about it, So just because you do things different from a man, it does not mean that you're anything less than a man. Like, it's not that at all, And I also think that another thing I would say is to try and get yourself around a group of women that can be supportive to you, but also try find yourself around men, whether it's like your father, your cousins, or that kind of thing, who also are going to just encourage you in your value of being a woman outside of your physicality. I think that that's also one of the things, because I had that. In general, when I was working in music and everything, obviously a majority of people are men and everything, I really was always reassured by the people around me as well. So it really did make a difference. So I'd say just be careful of the circle that you're in.
Okay, all right. Okay, Leslie, so we're about to bring the interview to a close. I'd love to talk more about organization first, but let's round things up. So what's the future for Leslie Kasumba?
Wow. Well, you can ask God. The number is, I'm joking. No, but jokes aside, you can ask God, because for me, to be honest, a lot of the things that have happened in my life have been, honestly, that God has just opened up opportunities. Like I mentioned, with Channel O, I wasn't trying. When I got on YFM, my first year out of high school, God just opened the doors, literally. And people always ask me, I'm like, oh, well, a funny thing happened. Because I told somebody that if I ever write a book, I'm going to call it A Funny Thing Happened, because I can never explain all of the awesome opportunities that have opened up to me, or positions or anything. I can just say that God was kind enough to put me in there at this particular time. So from the perspective of what's going to happen, I don't really know, but I hope it's going to be awesome. But at the moment, I'm really focusing on building my business, She Speaks Africa. One of the main projects that we're working on is the podcast, The Africa Whisperer, where we literally look at purpose, creative entrepreneurship, and how that's reshaping Africa. So I get to sit frontline. I'm sure you know what it's like to speak to people and you just leave inspired. Yeah. So I get to have conversations with people who are just basically reshaping what Africa is about. And then we have a few other projects that are coming out that are actual ideas, because my brain is actually an idea hub, and all of these projects, one of them is within, I'll say within the textile industry, but about how it tells a story about Africa, and so forth. So yeah, so then there's a series of projects. So each year there'll be 3 key projects that will come out from the business, like idea hubs, to tell a different narrative about Africa in a different way.
Okay, that's nice. Interesting. Thank you so much for Leslie for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Because if you've been on the other side of the interview.
It's very hectic, because I'm like thinking like, did I answer the question well? Yeah, but you were really gracious, so I appreciate it.
Right, thank you. Yeah. Okay guys, thanks for watching Just for Women Africa, and to the next show from Leslie and I to be. Bye.
Bye.